The sniper had been on the ridge for 6 hours before anyone admitted they could not find him. That was the part that cost them. Not the first shot, which came at 0840 and dropped Corporal Danny Reyes at the eastern edge of the compound perimeter. A clean hit from elevation that the medic said was over 800 meters, based on the delay between the sound and the impact. Not the second shot, which came 11 minutes later and clipped Staff Sergeant Brian Okoro through the upper arm as he moved to pull Reyes back behind cover. A warning or an accident, nobody could tell which. Not even the third shot, which came at 1007 and went wide by 8 inches of Lieutenant Aaron Dresch's skull as he raised his head above the sandbag wall for 2 seconds to look at the ridge through binoculars. 8 inches. It was the waiting that cost them. 4 hours of not moving, not extracting, not being able to get a medevac in because the flight corridor was directly inside the sniper's probable line of fire and nobody had a confirmed position on him, and you do not fly a helicopter into a corridor owned by a shooter you cannot locate. Reyes was stable. Okoro was losing blood at a rate that was still manageable, but would not stay that way. Captain Joel Merritt, commanding the compound, had 2 snipers of his own. He had sent them both to the northern observation post at 0900 to glass the ridge. They had been glassing for 3 hours. They had found nothing. The ridge was 1,100 meters of broken terrain, rock outcroppings, scrub, 3 dry creek beds running perpendicular to the slope, a collapsed shepherd's shelter at the eastern end that everyone kept looking at and nobody could confirm. At 1100, Merritt got on the radio. At 1117, he got an answer he did not expect. The answer was a woman's voice, calm and unhurried, asking for his current grid and the timestamps of the 3 shots. He gave them. There was a pause of approximately 40 seconds. "I need your elevation above sea level and current wind at the compound," the voice said. He gave those too. Another pause. Shorter. "I'm 40 minutes out," the voice said. "Keep everyone below the wall." Merritt looked at the radio. "Who is this?" he said. "Master Sergeant Yeva Marsh," the voice said. "CAS attachment. Forward element. I'll be coming in from the south approach. Don't shoot me." The radio clicked off. Before we go any further, if this story has already pulled you in, hit that subscribe button right now and stay with me until the very last word. Drop a comment below telling me what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story reaches. Because what happens on that ridge, you are not going to see coming. She arrived in a dust-covered Land Cruiser at 11:58, alone, which was the first thing Merritt noticed, and on time, which was the second. Master Sergeant Yeva Marsh was 38 years old, with a build that suggested endurance over force, long in the limb, economical in the way she moved through the compound gate and into the cover of the interior wall without being told to, without pausing to ask where the threat was, because she had already looked at the ridge on approach and had a preliminary answer forming that she was not yet ready to share. She had pale eyes, the color of early morning sky before the sun reaches it, and dark hair tied back tight, and she was carrying a rifle case that she set down against the interior wall with the careful deliberateness of someone managing something expensive and precise. She also had dirt on her boots and a small cut healing on her jaw, and the particular unhurried quality of a person who has been to worse places than this one and has a reference point that keeps the current situation in proportion. Merritt met her at the wall. He was 41, broad, a capable officer with a good record and a compound full of men who had been pinned for 4 hours and were tight with it. He looked at Yeva Marsh for the 3 seconds that it takes a man of his type to make an assessment he should not make, and then he made it. "Sergeant Marsh," he said. "I was expecting someone else," she said. "I know." She picked up the rifle case. "Show me the observation post," she said. He did not move immediately. Behind him, Sergeant First Class Dale Vickers, who had been on 4 deployments and had the specific bluntness of a man who has decided that directness saves time, said what Merritt was choosing not to say. "No offense," Vickers said, "but we've had 2 trained snipers on that ridge for 3 hours and found nothing. What makes command think sending a—" He stopped. He chose a different word than the one he had started with. "Sending one person is the answer?" Yeva looked at him. 3 hours, she said. 3 hours, he confirmed, glassing from the northern op. "That's correct." She looked at the ridge. She looked back at Vickers. "Go home, sweetheart," Vickers said. And he said it quietly, not cruelly, in the tone of a man who believes he is being practical, which made it worse than if he had meant it badly. She looked at him for 2 seconds. Then she turned and walked toward the northern observation post. What Sergeant First Class Dale Vickers did not know, and what Captain Merritt's file request had not yet returned from command, was that Yeva Marsh had been solving this exact problem. A concealed sniper on elevated terrain, engaged against a pinned element, position unknown, for the better part of 16 years. Her file, when it arrived 40 minutes later, would list the following: sniper qualified at 22, advanced designated marksman course at 24, close air support controller certification at 26, 3 combat deployments to Afghanistan and 1 to Syria, a confirmed long-range engagement record that the file summarized with a number that made Merritt read it twice, and a specialty designation that appeared in the remarks section under a classification header that meant Vickers did not have the clearance to read it. The specialty was counter-sniper operations. Specifically, locating concealed precision shooters from limited information using a methodology she had developed across 8 years of operational work and 4 years before that of theoretical study, a methodology that her instructors at the Special Operations Target Interdiction course had initially been skeptical of, and subsequently incorporated into the advanced curriculum, under a designation that did not include her name because the work was classified. The methodology was not complicated to describe. It was extremely difficult to execute. It started with the shots. Every shooter, regardless of training and discipline, leaves information in their shots. The angle of impact tells you the elevation. The time delay between impact sound and muzzle report tells you the approximate distance. The pattern of shots across time tells you whether the shooter is patient or reactive, confident or pressured, experienced or performing experience. The spacing between shots, the rhythm of them, tells you something about their training, their equipment, their psychological state. And the misses, when there are misses, tell you the most. Where the shooter expected the target to be versus where the target was, which tells you the shooter's sight line, which tells you, if you do the geometry carefully enough, a cone of probable position that narrows as you add each data point. She had 3 shots, 2 hits, 1 miss, timestamps, elevation, wind, distance estimate from the medic's assessment of the impact. She had been doing the geometry for the 40 minutes it took to drive to the compound. She had a cone. The cone included the shepherd's shelter. It also included 2 rock outcroppings to the west of the shelter and a dry creek bed running north-south that provided both concealment and a natural exit route, which was what a trained shooter would want, which meant the creek bed was more likely than the shelter, which the shooter would know was the obvious position, and would therefore avoid, unless he was using it as misdirection, which required a level of tactical sophistication that the shot pattern did not fully support. She had a probability distribution. The highest concentration was at the creek bed, 40 meters west of the shepherd's shelter, behind a rock outcropping at approximately 1,080 meters from the compound's eastern wall. She was not certain. Certainty was not the standard. The standard was best available answer under operational time pressure, which was a different thing and which she had been working to that standard for 16 years. She reached the northern op and found the 2 snipers, Sergeant Paul Adeyemi and Corporal Mark Lassen, and the prone behind a sandbag wall, with their rifles pointing at the ridge and their faces showing the specific strain of men who have been concentrating hard for 3 hours and have nothing to show for it. She lay down beside Adeyemi without preamble. "Walk me through what you've glassed," she said. He walked her through it. Thorough, professional, honest about the gaps. He was good. He had been looking in the right general area. He had not found the shooter because he had been prioritizing the shepherd's shelter, which was the obvious position, and had spent the majority of his time there. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "Creek bed. 40 meters west of the shelter, behind the northern face of the second outcropping from the east." Adeyemi looked at her. "We glassed that," he said. "You glassed the outcropping," she said. "The shooter is on the northern face, which you cannot see from this position. This op is 8 degrees too far east. You're looking at the southern exposure." He was quiet for a moment. "How do you know it's the northern face?" he said. "Third shot," she said. He missed Dresch by 8 inches left. If he were on the southern face of that outcropping, a left miss at this wind value pulls the round further left than 8 inches at this distance. Northern face changes the wind shadow, cuts the lateral drift. 8 inches left is consistent with a shooter in wind shadow on the northern face. Adeyemi stared at her. "He also doesn't know we know about the creek bed," she said. "He's been patient because he thinks his position is clean. He'll take another shot in the next 20 minutes if he sees movement. He's been spacing approximately 70 minutes between shots when he doesn't have a target. We're at 63 minutes since the last shot." She had been timing it on the drive. Lassen looked at Adeyemi. Adeyemi looked at her. She was already looking at the ridge. "I need to move 40 meters west and get eyes on the northern face of that outcropping," she said. "Is there a covered route?" Adeyemi thought for a moment. "Supply trench runs to the western corner of the compound. Gets you within 30 meters of the wall, but you'd be exposed for the last stretch." "How exposed?" 10 meters. Low scrub, possible defilade from the outcropping itself, depending on his exact position. "If his position is where I think it is," she said, "the northern face blocks his sight line to the western approach below 40 meters elevation. I'd be in his dead ground for the last 10. She was already moving. Merritt had followed her to the op and was standing behind the sandbag wall watching her with an expression that had traveled over the past 12 minutes, from skepticism through uncertainty to something that did not yet have a name but was paying close attention. "Marsh," he said. She paused. "You're certain?" he said. She looked at him. "No," she said. "But I'm more certain than anyone else here right now, and we have a man who has been losing blood for 4 hours. So." She moved before he could respond. The supply trench was narrow and smelled of diesel and old sandbags, and the particular dry earth smell of Afghanistan in the late morning when the sun has been on the ground long enough to pull everything upward in a thin haze. She moved through it at a crouch, rifle slung across her back, not because she was being careless, but because in the trench she needed her hands, and the rifle would come up when she needed it. She was thinking about the shooter, not about his position, which she was as confident in as the data allowed. About him. Who he was. His patience, 70-minute spacing, was trained patience, not natural patience, which meant formal instruction somewhere. His accuracy, 2 hits at estimated 1,000+ meters, meant either excellent equipment or excellent skill, or both. His restraint after the 3rd shot. A less experienced shooter would have taken additional shots during the 4 hours the compound was pinned, to keep them suppressed. He had not. He was conserving his position, which meant he understood that every shot reveals information, which meant he was thinking about this the way she was thinking about it. He was good. She needed to be faster than good. The trench ended at the western corner of the compound wall. She stopped there and looked at the 10 meters of low scrub between the wall and the natural defilade of the terrain fold that would put her in the shooter's dead ground, if her geometry was correct. If it was not correct, the 10 meters of low scrub was where she died. She thought about the third shot. 8 inches. The wind shadow from the northern face. She was right about that. She was sure enough. She moved. The 10 meters took 4 seconds, low and fast. And then she was in the terrain fold, and she exhaled and unslung the rifle and went prone in one motion that had been practiced enough times that it required no thought. She was 42 meters from the outcropping. She looked at the northern face. He was there. He was exactly where she had put him, behind a natural shelf of rock on the northern face of the second outcropping, in a shallow depression that gave him 18 inches of cover above his prone position and a clean sight line through a gap in the rock to the compound's eastern wall. He was wearing a ghillie suit that was good, genuinely good, the kind of work that took time and knowledge and explained why Adeyemi and Lawson had glassed that area and found nothing. She saw him because she was looking at the northern face from 42 meters, and the ghillie suit was built for distance, not for this range. At 42 meters, she could see the shape of him underneath it, the outline of his body in the depression, the muzzle of his rifle pointing through the rock gap. He did not know she was there. She put her scope on him. He was a man, she could tell that much. Dark clothing under the suit. No visible unit designation. The rifle was a Dragunov Svd, which told her origin of training, former Soviet bloc or supplied by, which was information she logged and would include in the report. He was still. He was patient. He was waiting for someone at the compound to give him a target. She controlled her breathing. 6 breaths per minute. She had been at 6 since the trench. She thought about Reyes, who was stable. She thought about Okoro, who was not. She thought about the flight corridor that had been closed for 4 hours because of the man in the depression 42 meters in front of her. She put her crosshairs on his center mass. She exhaled half a breath. She squeezed. The shot rolled across the ridge and the valley and came back as an echo from the far slopes, and in the compound 1,080 meters away, every man below the walls heard it and knew it was different from the previous shots. Different direction, different distance, different meaning. And Merritt grabbed the radio. "Marsh," he said. "Report." There was a pause of 11 seconds. "Target down," she said. "Northern face of second outcropping, 42 meters from the western wall." Dragunov CVD'd. "You can open the flight corridor." Silence on the radio. Then, copy that. "Medevac is inbound." She lay in the prone for another 30 seconds, which was not caution but habit. You stay down until you are certain, and certainty takes 30 seconds more than impatience wants to give it. Then she stood, cleared her rifle, and walked back across the 10 meters of low scrub to the trench. The medevac landed at 12:31. Okoro was on it. He made it to the surgical team at Bagram with enough time that the surgeon would later describe it as sufficient, which in surgical terms means closer than anyone wants. Reyes was evacuated on the second flight. He would spend 3 weeks recovering and return to duty. Merritt found Yeva at the vehicle, loading the rifle case into the Land Cruiser. He stood behind her for a moment, choosing words that he did not normally need to choose. "Marsh," he said. She closed the case latches. "Geometry," she said, before he could say whatever he had selected. That's all it was. "The shots told me where he was. The math told me how to get to him." He looked at her. "Vickers wants to apologize," he said. "Tell him to save it," she said, not harshly, practically. "He can buy me a coffee if we're ever at the same fob." She picked up the case. "You should request an update to your op position," she said. 8 degrees east is a consistent blind spot on that ridge. If another shooter uses this terrain, they'll use the same feature. You want eyes on the northern faces." She got in the Land Cruiser. She drove south. Adeyemi stood at the op wall watching the vehicle disappear into the dust of the southern approach road and tried to reconstruct the sequence of reasoning that had taken a set of 3 timestamps and 2 impact reports and a wind reading and produced a position accurate to 40 meters on a 1,100-meter ridge in under 40 minutes. He could not fully reconstruct it. He filed it in the category of things he had witnessed that he did not yet have the knowledge to explain, which was a category he tried to keep honest and tried to keep growing, because the day you stop filing things there is the day you stop learning. He went back to the op and spent the next hour glassing the northern faces of the ridge outcroppings. He found 2 more positions that would give a shooter the same wind shadow and the same dead ground approach. He wrote them up and sent them to Merritt. He thought about geometry. There are people who solve problems that others cannot solve, not because they are braver or stronger or more committed, but because they have built, over years of patient and unglamorous work, a way of seeing that processes the same information differently and arrives somewhere others do not reach. Yeva Marsh was not smarter than Adeyemi and Lawson. She had been doing this specific thing for 16 years, and they had not. And 16 years of doing one thing with full attention and honest assessment and willingness to be wrong and correct and wrong again builds a capability that looks from the outside like something extraordinary but is from the inside just the accumulated result of showing up and doing the work past the point where it is comfortable. The people who told her to go home gave her nothing she had not been given before and would not be given again. She had long since stopped spending energy on those moments. The ridge was there. The geometry was there. The man losing blood behind the compound wall was there. That was where the energy went. That is where it always went. And that is why, when it mattered, she was the one who could find what nobody else could find and take the shot that nobody else could take, and then drive south in a dust-covered truck and think about the next problem before the last one had finished echoing off the hills.